All right. Hello. My name is Jim. I am a member of the Temporal team. I'm really excited to welcome everybody to this tech talk today. We're going to talk about really this really kind of interesting workload in which Temporal is being used. To me, really a very interesting one, quite honestly. So with that, let's get going here. So, Chris, you want to join me here on camera? I'm going to go on camera too now. Well, good morning, Chris. How are you?
I'm well, Jim, and yourself. Thanks for having me on.
I'm doing very well. I'm happy to say hello and good morning to you twice in a half hour, but it's all for show, right? Yes, everybody, Chris and I have been talking for the last half hour or so in prep. Um, Today, y'all, we're going to talk about ANZ. If you're here in the States, it's ANZ. It's the same kind of thing, but very similar. Anyway, uh, I think ANZ's been an incredibly great partner to Temporal over the past, oh gosh, how long have you been working with us, Chris?
Probably about 3 years now.
Yeah. Yeah, really kind of like entrenched in the technology. And Chris, like on behalf of everybody here at Temporal, thank you because you guys have been a great partner in terms of helping us kind of get things right for certain things and everything else. But the bank itself is really doing some really amazing things. And we're going to get into that today. Like I said, we do hope there's questions and whatnot. So, Chris, welcome to the event. Can you just give us a quick introduction of yourself, just so everybody can kind of level set on where you sit in an organization and what you do?
Sure. So I guess I've been building distributed systems for quite a while now, and workflow, stateful orchestration, solving those sorts of problems at scale has been something I've been doing for a number of years. I don't want to think too hard on how many years exactly. It has been a while. And the last 4 years, we've been building a new home loan platform at ANZ, on top of Temporal.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, Chris, in the world, you're one of these people with have pretty deep experience with temporal. So y'all, as you're asking questions, thinking about chat, Chris does have some pretty extensive knowledge about how to define things, how to work with things, how to deploy, how to build all this stuff. So I think it should be really, really good. So let's just start at the beginning. For those that aren't familiar with ANZ, Chris, can you just give an overview of the bank and kind of like your whole approach to what y'all do?
Sure. So ANZ's one of the big four banks in Australia. We call the big four is sort of a concept of four of the largest banks in Australia, sort of take, I think, 70% of the market or something like that. And so ANZ has been one of the larger banks, heavily regulated industry. There's a lot of different products and propositions that we have in market today. A lot of customers, high scale environment, and so lots of really interesting problems that we have to solve in bringing any product to market, really. And so about 5 years ago, I think it was now, the bank decided to embark on a digital innovation program. And you'll see us in market at the moment as ANZ Plus. So that's a new proposition. So we are ANZ, but the branding is ANZ Plus is the product. And we've basically been building a whole new platform geared around amazing technologies like Temporal. So from the ground up, we're building new mobile application. We're building across multiple platforms, Android, iOS, etc. We're building a whole new propositions, very much trying to shrink our number of propositions a little bit just to focus on a smaller number of things and that people really love, do those really well. And yeah, so the last 3 years, we've been building home loans on Temporal. That's what we've been doing.
Cool. And so just before we get into the workload, Chris, and kind of home loans and what the workflows and activities and some of the things that we've done here, in preparation of this, we kind of talked about ANZ as being kind of this like digital first bank. What does that mean for an engineering organization? I ask because, well, I'm a little partial because I mean, things like Temporal come up as kind of one of those things, but like, what does it mean for just as an organizational?
It's an interesting question. I mean, yeah, digital first, I guess for us is trying to bring banking to the handset more than to branches. And we will always need to engage with customers in multiple different modes and venues, but we can do some really amazing things in digital platforms, right? We can put banking at people's fingertips. We've got a lot of strategies around, even our app strategy of, offline first and things like that. We can work and provide, data views in very sporadic network conditions. And Australia as a large continent, there are a lot of people that live in not so great internet coverage areas. So things like that's really interesting for us to bring this sort of capability to market.
Yep.
And just more generally, we're very much engineering or engineer-led. The banks, in my observation, traditionally have been very business-led. Business leaders making business decisions and generally make great business choices along the way. But we're very much trying to flip that and try to be engineer-led, and let our engineers make great technology decisions that can drive that customer-centric, purpose-driven culture forward.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. I think, financial institutions like yourself, Chris, have always kind of been at the forefront of like thinking differently about how technology can affect, assets and everything they do. It's sometimes I almost think that these places are becoming more engineering companies than they are actually banks, like it's interesting how that's happening. And it's impressive, the team and everybody I've interacted with within the team. It's just really kind of a high-end group of engineers. And so, I think it's always interesting to talk to groups that are doing really cool stuff. And I think what you guys are doing around home loan origination, just to get into the workload and more explicitly how you use Temporal, is pretty interesting. Could you just so people have a basic sense of like what this workload is, Chris? Can you just give a quick overview of like what is that home loan origination process? A lot of us have bought houses, so we kind of know, but like just so we all kind of level set, yeah.
Yep. So not dissimilar, I think, in different markets. Comparing Australia to the States or even to the UK, the home loan journey can be quite frustrating and scary, I guess, for customers. And it is a very big, complex process. We're 440 plus steps in a home loan journey from start to end. If you look at it as a massive process map, it definitely doesn't fit on an A4 page if you try to draw it. And to deliver that sort of process, there's a lot of things must happen. Things must happen in a certain order, and things must be guaranteed to happen. And traditionally, the bank, looks to workflow solutions to solve those problems. Most of the banks, I think all of the banks, would have some sort of stateful orchestration workflow saga style capability at the center of any origination journey, but particularly home loans. And for us, it's very much, how can we pick the best technology that aligns to how our engineers want to work, how they want to build software, and still deliver amazing propositions? That was our question. That's where we started.
So you're talking to somebody from Temporal, so I see workflows and everything. So it's almost anything that anybody tells me, I could say, well, that's a workflow. This one's pretty clear though, right, Chris? I mean, there's a reliability aspect of this. There's also kind of like there's a bit of a set path, but there's different kind of each loan the same? Are the activities different for each person? How does that work?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time trying to come up with what does a model look like if you're going to build in Temporal. You could have carved it up a lot of different ways. We started with some domain exploration. We did some event storming. I ran a number of event storming workshops with a lot of business experts and things like that, exploring the domain and trying to come up with, okay, this is a really big, long, complex process. How do we carve this up into reasonable chunks that we can, get squads of engineers around and actually start building and do that as quickly as we can. And so along the way, we came up with the concept of domains. We sort of broke things down into, reasonably, you'd expect to have some sort of loan application domain. You'd expect to have some sort of financial position domain. You'd have some sort of settlement domain, things like that. These are all concepts that align to business concepts, which is really powerful for us. And then we went and built workflows within those areas. And so temporal aligning into that, we're trying to very much say, well, a loan application pretty much works in this way for all different types of applications. I mean, construction loans and difference between refi and purchase loans and things like that can be a little bit different, but generally the flow of a loan application is fairly consistent. You start with what the customer wants to do, you ask them some questions, you do some analysis, you make sure that the product is suitable to meet the needs that they've expressed in applying for an application, and then the rest is sort of flows on from there.
So it's really interesting, like this kind of domain approach to what you're doing, Chris, and like having the conversation with the business. I think in the past, what we've seen is like, okay, you have a conversation with business and then you go code things, and there's no way they could actually understand what you coded. And so like, talk to me, like, do you guys share like what you've designed from like this domain approach to workloads with the business? I mean, how much are they validating what you're doing? Is the process, I guess, I'll just shortcut the question. I mean, is the process more collaborative now?
Absolutely. Look, traditionally, excuse me, traditionally we may have, gone through, and this is where the organization was maybe a little bit less agile. We're trying to be a lot more agile these days. We're trying to move very fast, or as fast as we can, safely. We may have gone through long, lengthy analysis cycles and design and drawing up really detailed process maps and all that sort of stuff. We're much more now having conversations with engineers, business, people like myself in the room acting as some glue to glue all these people together, but having conversations around temporal. Hey, we're going to build this new workflow. Hey, we're going to put these new two activities in a workflow. And these aren't hard concepts for, the layperson, the non-technical person who doesn't code every day to understand. These are reasonably, ubiquitous concepts for anyone to really wrap their mind, their conceptual thinking around and understand and participate well in a conversation. So absolutely, collaboration is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of one of these unwritten things about temporal that once you start using it, the involvement with the business sometimes even gets deeper because they can actually read what's going on, or they could at least visualize through your charts and graphics, whatever you're doing. But I mean, I want to come back to some of the workload stuff, but this is a really good jumping off point, Chris, to like you guys had considered other type of like BPMN or like workflow tools that were a little bit more graphical and kind of like they do speak the language of the business.
Yeah.
How much does, so like when I start to think about like this domain kind of approach y'all took, this kind of replaces that, right? And so, but a little bit more practical. Like what did those, I guess, how did you go through this kind of decision process, kind of moving more towards temporal?
Yeah. We had a couple of, I don't want to call them false starts, but we had a couple of explorations down a certain path with other tools.
V1 and then a V1 maybe, Chris, right?
An initial exploration. So look, the bank likes platforms. They like products. They like a product that they can wrap a big red bow around and say, this does everything. It's the Rolls Royce. It does workflows. It gives you a great operational UI. It does everything. And so we did have a platform before that that we had been building on, and it did tick all the boxes, so to speak. It wasn't necessarily aligned very well into our engineering community, and so it was a little bit atypical in that respect, given our early principles of being very much engineer driven as an organization. but it was kind of working, but it was quite slow, and it was quite difficult for us. Slow as in speed to build, and it was also quite difficult for us to align into how we wanted to build in mobile was one of the key challenges for us. And so the evolution we went through was we went through some exploration. Well, let's step back on this problem and rethink it, and let's put some engineers on this problem, including myself. I do think of myself, I'm an engineer at heart. I code pretty much daily. And we came across Temporal, probably about 3.5 years ago now. We did a spike on one of our use cases. And that was the pivotal moment for us. That was where we went from, something that we were going to have to do a lot of delivery planning and coordination and expectation, probably resetting and things like that around, to, hey, here's a different way that we could do this, something that we could scale very differently in terms of how we put engineers onto this problem. And we can do it a lot faster than what our current trajectory is looking like. And so the decision was almost a no-brainer. We were looking at estimates that were a year long, and we were turning those into estimates that looked like 10 weeks, 12 weeks. It was really compelling.
Yeah. So even with estimates like that, like doing things a lot faster, and like there's still going to be dissent within an organization, right? Because there's still people who are like, hey, I chose that tool, or I'm used to working within that tool. Like, and how do you get people to kind of come along within that temporal journey? Like beyond this kind of like, yeah, dude, it's kind of easy to tell the business, hey guys, something that took a year is going to take 10 weeks. That's pretty straightforward. But you've got engineers or, people who are used to kind of other tools. How did you get them kind of into like the temporal mindset, or, what was some of that process?
Yeah, we're still going through that process. If I'm honest, Jim, like there's always somebody that needs to be convinced about something. The thing with Temporal is it's so easy. You guys have made it so easy. The developer experience, me being able to run Temporal CLI command line, get a little development environment up. I'm coding away, banging out a couple of workflows and some activity. I can do that in, 15 minutes. There's no other workflow tool that matches that developer experience. Right. Not that I've come across recently anyway. Happy to be corrected. So that's just, sort of core, I guess, to where we were there.
Yeah. And it's interesting, it's like, so, like look at Max and Summer, who kind of created this project. I think this is like the 5th incarnation of kind of them trying to do this. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody the other day about this. Like, you do something once, it's like, okay, it worked. The second time, you typically over-architect the thing, and it's stupid. The third time, you kind of get it better. It's a whole lot better. Who gets a 4th and 5th time to basically do things? I think what they've done this time that's right is this, like the SDKs are right. Like that tactile interaction with what we're doing for the developer is right. And I think, to me, we see just a lot of like interaction with the community where people are saying, I think some of the things that you're saying, Chris, right now. But there's a little bit of a kind of like a learning curve to kind of become temporally, you know what I mean? Like, can you talk to me like how does the team go through that process? And then actually we'll just start there. And I want to come back to the workload and talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of that in this context. But how do you help the team learn temporal, Chris?
Sure. Firstly, we usually start with, because we've had some engineers in particular that almost like a core group of temporal SMEs that we're growing internally. They've been at it for quite a while. So one of the first things that we do is we generally take a couple of guys, myself included, and somebody who is starting off on their temporal journey. We're going to have a conversation with them. Hey, what are you trying to do? What's the use case? How can we help you? And very quickly, the conversation will be, we're doing a shared coding session. Somebody's got VS Code or their IDE of choice open. We're banging away at some workflows, and within half an hour, people are already getting some familiarity with, okay, I understand what a workflow is. I understand some of the semantics around activities. These things are not super hard concepts. And so really talking at that lowest level is the fastest way we've found to get people up to speed. At least on that initial hurdle of, what's a workflow, what's an activity, understanding some of the semantics around non-determinism, those sorts of problems. And then my general recommendation is just pick a problem and just go and see how you might solve it in temporal. Have a go at something. Because typically, even though temporals are really basic, there's not huge amount of primitives and things like that you have to learn. The SDK is not enormous. There are lots of different ways that you can sort of solve problems. And so exploring, that sort of, I need to orchestrate this thing across 3 systems. What does that look like? Does it look like 3 activities? Yeah, probably it does. Those sorts of things. And getting the engineers to have a feeling for that sort of stuff. And then you can bring it back up a level and say, okay, now you've got a basic understanding of temporal. How do we start aligning that into more general concepts? How many workflows are we going to build? What are the purpose of those workflows? What jobs are they going to do? That sort of stuff. And that's where we start very much aligning into some of the concepts internally, at least, of domain-driven design. And a domain has a purpose. Loan application domain, it has a purpose. There's a big loan application workflow in the heart of that, but there's also lots of sort of smaller workflows in there as well that support it and interact with it.
Yeah, I think step 1 is getting into this kind of like, there's like being indoctrinated to the paradigm, which is like, okay, there's workflows and these, there's certain rules around them. And then there's these activities, and that's where you code like this, the error prone parts, and there's retries and lots of things that, I think that's step 1 is getting the paradigm right. You know what I mean? But like, I think, most developers kind of work within a stack today. Did they, did the engineers run into any other issues around, like, beyond this kind of initial, like, let me code a little bit differently? Were there any other issues that they had?
Not using temporal. One of the issues we've had is this one's you could make a joke out of this one, but the overusage of temporal maybe, and I know you guys would not want, would like us to overuse temporal, but I guess for me as wearing my architect hat for a moment, right tool for the right job. And so what we are finding, which is really interesting, is that once engineers start playing around with temporal, they fall in love with the paradigm, and then everything looks like a temporal nail. Temporal's the hammer. Everything's a temporal problem to solve.
What I say everywhere, I work at temporal. Everything's a workflow, dude. Like everything's a workflow. Sorry. Like it's so funny. Like I think you do start to look at the world differently. And I think you use the right tool for the right job. Do we think temporal can be used for all the things? Sure, you bet. But like, what's right for what you want to accomplish? I want to go back a little bit to the workload itself around, this home loan origination. And, there's some things that you kind of become familiar with after you code using temporal for a while, Chris, right? 2 of them, we spoke about this as kind of, we were talking about this thing. It's like, there's these things called like long running workflows, and, actually coding and understanding kind of human in a loop and those sort of things. Can you just talk to me, like, what is like how do you think about long running workflows, or how do you explain those to people for those who aren't used to that kind of concept, right? It's critical to what you're doing, right?
Yep. Yeah, very much so. Look, for us, like if you just focus on that home loan application workflow, refinance journeys are quite compact. They might only run for 15, 20 days, but even that, I would call that a long running workflow. Anything more than seconds, I'm calling long running workflow is my definition. But we may have loan application workflows that run for months, many months. Right. In the future, once we get to purchase flows and things like that. So for me, I think more often than not, we spend a lot of time talking about long-running workflows. Uh, how do we take care of them? How do we make sure that they don't fail? How do we make sure that they're resilient? And I mean, most of that you get for free in Temporal, because it's just naturally a resilient framework. But there is some thinking that we have to do that's been interesting for us because we're a very integration-heavy bank. We've got lots of systems that we need to integrate to deliver a home loan proposition. We do have to do a fair bit of thinking around, okay, are all our APIs idempotent? What happens when we have network partitions? Now, some of that Temporal will just naturally kick in and some retries kick in and things like that. But, bring that up a level, working with SRE, how do we make sure that we're setting the right retry policies? Mm-hmm. How do we make sure that we don't end up with a retry storm? How do we make sure that if we've got some cascading failures that we can actually start backing off and give a system some time to recover and things like that? Those are all, starting to get into some really advanced concepts, but Temporal makes it fairly easy, right? You set a retry policy, you apply a coefficient, you back off, you're doing all the right things, and you're doing that with some basic configuration. Like before, we'd be writing stateful state tracking in a database somewhere and trying to manage what retry am I up to and all this sort of stuff that can go wrong or be miscoded and things like that. And this just works.
Yeah, like there's the mental gymnastics of trying to figure out what the retry policy is, right? And like, okay, what's going to work for the system? And then there's the coding of it and the testing of it and the like tuning of it. It's just so many different levels. Chris, do you guys characterize like the productivity gains of Temporal in the context of things like this? Because I think that's one of the things that's I guess I think once you start using it, you see it. But like, I think for general people new to it, do you guys characterize those things internally, or is it just kind of something that's kind of more understood,
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We're very metrics driven as an org, both on the business and the tech side. We're very much aligned to DORA metrics and things like that. Do we measure productivity in that respect, like in the cost of, being unable to do things, or how much do we gain because we can just configure something versus we have to go and build retries? Probably not, because I think we've evolved past that point. We don't think about that anymore. We take it for granted that we can configure a policy. It's a quick and easy thing, and you don't think about it anymore. But I think the alternative, and if you did compare it back to other platforms and tooling, I think the divide is quite wide, Jim.
Yeah.
In my experience,
I'm going to take quite wide and run with that. So, yeah. So actually there was a question basically in this context. Like, I don't know, Chris, can you just give it just for a home loan origination? What is the end-to-end process? I mean, I guess, if you've been through a home loan, you kind of have some of the things, but like from a bank point of view, it's a little bit different. Like it's a lot of steps, right? If for us to go through the whole thing, it would take a fair amount, but like there's some big bulky things that you do, right?
There is. It's getting easier in the Australian market. We have a thing called open banking. I don't know how well this is understood in the States. So being able to pull customers' data from another institution, financial data, and do credit assessments on that data, making it a whole lot easier on customers. So this is something we're looking at, and our goal, well advertised in market, is a 10-minute home loan on a mobile. And you think about that as a goal. Yes, it is a massive process, but we're trying to trim that down and streamline that for the customer, and be very intentional about that, and do it in under 10 minutes. You just think about what's involved to deliver that. There's a lot of temporal underpinning all of that, but to describe the process, I guess very quickly, a customer wants some lending of some kind. At the moment, we're offering a refi proposition, refinance an existing loan. either with ANZ or with somebody else. And you start that journey by telling us a little bit about the property and the loan that you're refinancing. You tell us about your general needs. Are you coming to us because you want to pay off a loan faster, or you want to, you might not like your existing bank. That happens. People fall out of love with institutions. Whatever that is, and then we do some basic analysis on that. Do the things that you're saying line up with the thing that we're about to offer you? And this is actually really critical for any financial offering in the Australian market. It's very heavily regulated around. You must only be offering things to customers that they actually need. And so following on from that, you tell us a little bit about your finances. We effectively take all the data that you've given us. So the things that, the loan that you want, your needs, your finances that you've told us, all that we've acquired in the future from something like open banking, and we assess that. And we've put in a new credit platform. We're doing some interesting stuff in that space. But we can, if we have all the data is verified, we can give you an approval in minutes. It's right. Basically as fast as you can get through the journey, we'll give you an automated yes or no at the end. At the end. From then on, it's very typical in terms of how it flows on there to how it would in most banks. I think we flow on into settlement. We issue documents. We do all this sort of stuff, but all the fun, all the interesting stuff sort of happens in that front part of the journey up to the pivotal moment of, are we going to say yes or no? Or maybe. Sometimes we say maybe, which means we might need to verify a little bit more information, but yeah.
And that's where I was going to ask, Chris. So how much does a human come into this conversation now, right? Because what you're talking to me about is 10 minutes pretty much seems automated end to end. I've gotten car insurance like that, but not home. So how much human interaction and kind of I think one of the cool things about Temporal is this whole being able to have a human in a loop of a workflow is kind of a cool thing. How much human interaction is in this?
Yep. So right now there is a little bit of human interaction. We're actually working on improving the automation. One of our key metrics this year is to improve the amount of automation that we're doing. And so, but there'll always be a human-assisted element to a home loan. In some cases, some people might need less help. They might need no help, but some people might need more help, and that's okay. We will have humans in the loop when required. There might also be some tasks that might always be human-centric, right? So, for example, reviewing a payslip, or if you're in the maybe bucket, we've made a decision and we've said you're almost there, but we need to ask you a few more questions about something. There's this concept of reasonable inquiry from a credit risk point of view. We must inquire about things that are, especially if you're on the border, so to speak, of getting an approval. And so a human might need to have a direct conversation with the customer. And so, at the credit decision part of the cycle, we may have said maybe. We use Salesforce extensively. We have coach assistants and things like that. Those sort of actors sitting in Salesforce, and they interact with these temporal workflows to say, I've had a conversation with the customer. They've given me some information. This thing is now resolved, and now we can move on and effectively reassess, and we get a positive credit outcome. So those patterns are in effect in a few places. We're trying to drive the metrics down, but they'll always be there as a stopgap to somebody may need to intervene in the process or assist the process.
And it's just done in code. It's not like you have anything else around this to make this happen, right, Chris? I mean, it's just temporal code, basically.
Yep.
Really
signal handlers are one of our favorite things here. So, and workflow updates will also help a lot. We've been doing a lot of POCing and experimentation with workflow updates in the background. But yeah, very much whether it's a customer interacting with a workflow because the customer's providing some data that goes into a loan application workflow in self-service, or suddenly there's a coach that might even be acting on behalf of the customer, or fulfilling these additional steps that only one of our Salesforce operators can do, all works the same way, which is brilliant, right? For us, we put some APIs over the top of that. We've got a really nice boundary into these workflows, and pretty much any channel can integrate with it.
Yeah, and it's awesome. I think workflow update is something that, has been in the works for quite a while. It's kind of one of the first kind of key primitives that we've added to kind of the core of like some of the temporal capabilities. Workflow update really being kind of the combination of a query and a signal, if you're all familiar with kind of the way those things work. Chris, have you guys figured out kind of like what your trade-offs are between using workflow update versus just signals? Have you guys kind of figured out a approach to what that is yet? You are pretty advanced, and you guys have been kind of going down that path for a while for a little bit more advanced people.
Yeah, look, we were using a pattern. We still are actually, until workflow update replaces it. But a signal in, sort of signal back pattern to do request response style interactions with workflows, particularly when you need something fairly synchronous rather than asynchronous. So workflow update is going to really pull out a fair bit of tech debt for us around that. But signals are really good to just send an imperative command to a workflow. An operator in Salesforce ticking a box to say, yes, I've had that conversation, tick, signal in, done, move on, workflow moves on, everything good. It's just such a clean, easy to implement pattern. There's very little boilerplate or infrastructure we have to put in place for these things. About the only thing we do is we put APIs in our boundaries between things. So Salesforce is communicating via API to these workflows, and we just model that as an API.
Yep. So, Chris, I'm a little sensitive to time. We're a little bit over, but I thank you for all the stuff. I want to. There was a question kind of around infrastructure used to run workflows, and I'm going to turn that a little bit in because I kind of understand what your infrastructure is, because quite honestly, you're using Temporal Cloud as kind of to host the service side of it. And the other side is like how many workers and size of the application, right? Because there's kind of two sides of Temporal, right? And I'll just kind of go more towards like the Temporal service, which is you guys are using Temporal Cloud now. Like I think you were using self-hosted. I think at the very beginning, I think you even tested out on Cadence, right? Like from what I understand. What led you to kind of use Temporal Cloud? Because like, look, man, everybody has their own kind of decision process around this. I'm always happy when you choose cloud, but just if you can help people kind of go through what your decision process was, it'd be great.
Yeah, so we have quite a large platform team. We have a really advanced engineering team building what we would call our internal developer platform. One of my colleagues gave a really interesting presentation on our internal developer platform at Google Next this year. So there's some really interesting stuff we're doing there. Question for us with internally hosted Temporal versus cloud is, do we really need to be experts in running a temporal control plane? Is that gonna help us bring our next proposition to market faster, better, more resilient? Whatever the other considerations are here, and the answer is probably no. The answer to that is actually where we derive our value add, where we're going to lead our market and differentiate ourselves in the market is by building amazing workflows that can power digital propositions. And so for us, it's sort of a no-brainer. It wasn't a very hard sell for us to say, we're spending a lot of time, with some smart people running an internal control plane, or we can pay you guys a fee and consume it and actually not have to worry about it anymore. And so it did come down to a sort of bit of an age-old buy versus build conversation, but it was really easy. The math, the financials, everything stacked up. We put some really interesting stuff in place with how we access the SaaS model. So we're using the proxy encryption model where we intercept all traffic to Temporal. You guys have a really great sample in I think Java and Go samples repos, where you can basically intercept the traffic and do some encryption. So only encrypted data leaves your network. And as a bank, our security folk love it, right? Everything is encrypted. Nothing leaves the perimeter that's not encrypted. Like, it's fantastic.
So just final question on kind of more technical, like at least this side of it. I want to know like where you guys are going with Temporal as well. Financial institutions typically will have a fairly complex and fairly intense security review of various different things. And so, how well did we do going through that, Chris? I mean, I think we designed with a security first mindset, but just kind of characterize that whole that investigation, if you will.
There's probably a thank you I should put in here. So you guys were extremely patient with us. Our threshold, our bar for security is very high. We think we're probably, well, we keep hearing consistently from vendors like yourselves that ours is probably the highest bar in the Australian region. You guys did awesome, right? Like it was helped, I guess, by our approach to encrypting all the data and things like that. But you opened up a little bit and showed us a little bit of your internal architecture and things like that, which helped sell the story to and our internal security partners and things like that. It wasn't tough really at the end, Jim. It was just some time and effort and yeah.
Well, I think we were designed with there's a bit of a security first mindset in some of the things that we did, including like data converter. Like the way we approach it is kind of unique. If anybody's interested in kind of how data converter works, just go check out our docs. It's actually pretty cool. And just I think our approach is fairly complete. You could thank us, Chris, but honestly, we thank you all because I think going through this with you and the team, I think it helped us learn how to talk about these things in a much more efficient way. I think trust.temporal.io was directly impacted by some of the conversations that we had with y'all. We're learning a lot along the way too. So thank you and the team for doing that. So yeah, if anybody's interested in kind of like our full security story, I think trust.temporal.io is one of those things that we're kind of getting very forward in the way we think about how we communicate these sort of things to the market and to y'all doing evaluations around Temporal. So last question, Chris. So home loan origination has been, I'll just say, fairly successful. I'm not going to get too deep into like that whole thing. It's been a whole lot of fun working with you and the team doing so. Where is Temporal usage going kind of broader in the bank? Are you guys looking at, I know you're looking at for other like workloads, but like how broad can this go?
Very. I mean, this is where people kind of play with it, and the earlier conversation we had about falling in love with Temporal, then you have to kind of slow things down. But look, quite seriously, we're already building other origination use cases on it. So we're also building our open banking stack. So the ability to egress data for open banks, we're regulated to make data available to other institutions under the open banking regulation framework. But we're also using Temporal to pull data from other institutions. So when a customer comes through a flow and consents, the whole open banking data in model is underpinned by Temporal. Payments is another really interesting use case. So payments being such a critical proposition for a bank, we've had quite a lot of conversations around the payment use case and using Temporal to make sure that things happen, resiliently. Payments can't fail ever, sort of thing. Really interesting use cases. There's some other things that are sort of coming. We're just starting to think about things around fraud life cycles and AML loops and time-based. I wake up every 12 months and ask the customer a question to revalidate KYC information and things like that. Some really interesting use cases that we see coming in the future.
Yeah. Talk about interesting long-running workflows. I think one of the most like looking at a customer as a long running workflow. Like here Chris Gavin is a workflow execution, and like you have a lifestyle, you have a lifetime with a bank. How incredible. And so like I those are the types of things I find incredibly intriguing once you really start to get temporal, and that concept gets really, really interesting. So I think I asked most of the questions along the way, Chris, we had going on here. There was one last one. How do you think about data observability in the context of, temporal and workflows now?
Look, I think the the simplest thing we've had is using the temporal UI. I mean, we have other techniques of we're very event driven, even though we're very stateful workflow driven with temporal. We're also highly event driven. So a lot of interaction between services and things like that is event driven. We also throw out a lot of events into other operational stores so that we can provide reporting views and other things like that on top of them. But the temporal UI is just amazing, and we've actually tied into the proxy, the codec encrypt decrypt model, the ability to inject, looking at the actor who's logged into temporal UI to say, actually, are you in this group that gives you access to decode data? So this has been a really key control for us to say most people have access to temporal UI and can see the operational state of even production workflows, but you can't see the data.
Right.
Very easy, though, to get access to that data by getting yourself, escalated into a group that gives you that access, and therefore you can see the data in the workflow. You can do some queries, you can do some interesting things in the UI, and that's actually become a really critical tool for us in terms of ops support. Understanding why did this workflow behave in this way? Okay, because the customer put this data in there and there was a reaction to that and this happened. Very easy to answer those sorts of questions in this model. Very akin to in a production support model, opening up a database and running a select query on a table in a nice UI with all really interesting controls around it.
Well, I'll pass that on to our design team, or our UX team. The nice design comment is a great one. But I think what's really interesting, Chris, is the like this level of data that you have along with observability and kind of like the workflow execution itself. Like there's one thing to actually understand if something failed, piece of hardware, a process, something happened, right? And you do logs, you look all this stuff, but like we're talking about a different level of insight here, right? Like you're talking about like the home loan origination, the data itself and how that interacted with the process, right? And so like, how long did it take for people to kind of get like really thinking like, oh wait, this is a different level of understanding here? This is kind of one of these things. It's just like, oh wow, I have this now. Like it opened up a new world, or is it like, wait a second, it took a little bit of time for people to like really start to, because to me, it's one of those like another kind of like unsung heroes of temporals. Like this level of visibility is kind of intense.
It did take some time. We didn't quite get this right off the mark. We kind of did for one use case, but home loans, again, we kind of explored a couple of options, and I think there was an attachment some of our engineers had to databases, for example. Let's build these amazing temporal workflows, but let's also have a database that underpins it. And we went through a really interesting evolution around that, where we kind of were like, do we really need a database? Like what's the database doing for us? And it turned out actually over a period of time, and it wasn't a very long period of time, but over a period of time, we convinced ourselves actually we don't need a database. The data goes into temporal and it's fine to stay there. At the end of the workflow, we've evented some things out and they go into long-term archive to meet audit requirements and things like that. But we don't need a database. There's literally no purpose to doing that other than it's another thing that actually slows us down, because it's another thing that you have to worry about. It's another thing that you have to version and update and keep track of and put controls around and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that was very interesting for us, and putting all the data and keeping it in the workflows also has the advantage of we can just go and look at it in the UI.
Yeah.
really easily.
So it's in my former life, Chris, I was kind of a database person. And it was after about 2 months here at Temporal, I kind of really started to look at my life, my past, a little bit differently. Are you still going to use a database for like crazy? Like, yes, man. Like databases don't go away, but like questioning certain things that you don't need to do anymore, I think is one of those paths and journeys people go on.
Right,
And
right tool for the right job. Like we
that's
do
right.
have some workloads where we're doing
Amen.
transaction aggregation, right? You're doing millions, hundreds of millions of transactions, and aggregating those and doing all sorts of interesting stuff. You're not going to do that in Temporal. You're going to do that in a database, and you might be using
Right.
Apache Beam and other things like that. But for these use cases, put it in Temporal, and it's easy. You don't there's only one thing that you have to worry about. It's
Yeah.
temporal.
And that's the exact right thing too, Chris. It's right tool for the right job. And is Temporal right tool for everything? No. Is it right tool for a lot of things? Probably. Does it replace certain uses of a database? Probably. Certain spots, like do I need a queue somewhere where I did like I don't know, can the temporal task queue handle that? Probably. I don't know. Like I think you just start looking at things a little bit differently. That's what got me excited about temporal, and I think that's what we're seeing from a lot of companies. So cool. Well, we are about 5 minutes from the top of the hour. Chris, thank you so much for doing this today. And more importantly, on behalf of everybody at Temporal, thank you for, again, all the input and all the like the partnership, I think is what we've seen. So any like parting words about Temporal before we kind of sign off for the day over there, for the night for me?
Oh, look, thank you guys. I think you guys have brought an amazing product that does what it says on the tin, right? Like if you like, as an architect, as an engineer, I like finding something that said it's going to be a durable execution framework, and it's exactly what it is. And I think that's great. You guys have really done what you set out to do. It's awesome.
Well, thanks, Chris. I think there's no higher compliment, quite honestly. Like as an ex-software engineer, I just want to build the thing that we say we're going to build, y'all. Like that's what we do. I think we're all developers in some form or fashion. I think here at Temporal and working with great development teams or engineering organizations like yourself, it's just fun for us. So thank you for doing this, Chris. Thanks everybody for sticking around for a longer time today. I grossly underestimated the amount of time that you and I were going to talk, I guess. I thought a half hour. I'm sorry, everybody. I hope it was valuable for y'all. Anybody listening and, recording everywhere, thank you all for joining live. Thank you all for listening. And with that, I have a great day. Thanks, Chris. I'll talk to you later. See you, man.
Thank you.